So, Patrick, at Peach, you have been essentially one of the first true low-cost carriers in Japan.
The first.
But it took a really long time for Japan to adapt the low-cost carrier model. So why do you think it has taken so long until someone actually started that?
You've got back 7 years before you had it, and there was a lot of debate and discussion.
Yeah.
Is it appropriate? Because there's a pretty well-established airline network, and it's dominated by Japan Airlines and All Nippon Airlines.
Yeah.
But you couldn't help but notice what was going on in Southeast Asia, where there was already the development of the low-cost airline, and questions were beginning to come up. So it was ANA were the ones who raised the question and said, should we have a low-cost airline? I went over and made a presentation to their board. There were 53 people, senior management and board people there to hear and to talk about the low-cost airlines. After which they said, we should look into this. And the feasibility study was established. So it takes a time to make things happen. But it took overall 2 years before it was operational. So Peach was the first low-cost airline that came into Japan. Now there's now 4 in Japan alone, but more critically there's so many others from Korea and from China and Taiwan. So there's a lot of them. But it has been slow to start. But so in other words, low-cost airlines in Europe, which I was involved with Ryanair, was done 25 years ago. It took another 20 years before it took off in Japan.
But so you mentioned before that there were difficulties getting it up and running. So obviously certification of an airline in Japan is significantly more time consuming than it is here in Europe. I think AirAsia Japan has just been flying to Sapporo for months back and forth until they got an AOC.
Yes.
So other than that, what was difficult when you first started? I mean, you also had the problem that you had to establish Kansai as a new departure airport for domestic flights,
right.
And you were the first ones to use Terminal 2, if I'm not mistaken. So
Terminal 2 was built for Peach.
Right.
Yeah. Because, again, historically, and it still goes on today, you go into an airport and you're presented with, here's the situation, traditional approach. You want to operate here, no problem here, but you're in the main building with everyone else. So you have to use the jetways, you have to use the check-in desk, you have to contract to take 6 desks and everything else. So not interested. If that's the way we can't make money.
Right.
So we said no. And we had a negotiation with the ministry in the first instance, and subsequently with the airport operator, and got a fundamental change in principles to apply. So it takes a long time to make it happen.
So would I be right in saying that Peach, in comparison to the other low-cost carriers that are currently in the market, if you look at Skymark, Jetstar, Vanilla, Spring, AirAsia, with the exception of AirAsia, is Peach the only true low-cost carrier that is really sticking to the original model that you also were involved with in Europe? Or
no, I think AirAsia is working the same model, with some differences, but fundamentally. Yeah. But Jetstar is a development from Qantas in the first instance, right. Now in a joint venture with Japan Airlines, and they still co-share and they still do all those operations, and they interline and do all of the things which are breaking way out of the rules of the ultra low cost airline.
Yeah.
ANA board allowed Peach to be totally independent, do what was right, and the model was clearly to follow the pattern that's been done by Ryanair in Europe.
Well, if you look at one thing that is very different, you just mentioned the Ryanair, which I was very interested to hear from you. If you look at Ryanair or EasyJet, in Europe they don't have to compete with legacy carriers operating wide bodies in high density configurations.
Correct.
So how is that different, that you have to compete with ANA and CHAL that are operating really big aircraft, a lot of seats in them against you, which is then making narrow body operations more expensive in relation to that?
Well, within the domestic network, right. they operate the small aircraft too. They operate the Boeing 737 and the A320.
Yeah.
So it's no different than anywhere else. They do have 787s and 777s operating even on domestic airports. So today, Peach has got 13 domestic routes, and I think it's 15 international routes, so it's expanded quite rapidly. Another principle that we have is we're not like a traditional airline. We've set up Kansai as the main base. We already have a base in Okinawa, and we've now set up a base in Sendai late last year, and later this year we'll go into Shitose.
Yeah.
So we're taking the Ryanair principle. You're not going to be in your home base only. That gets utilization up, it gets performance up, gets all of the things that help you to reduce your costs.
Sure. If you look at, you just mentioned the 15 international routes. On these international routes, what's the current split between Japanese traveling overseas, between tourists coming in? Because just this morning you announced that you were investing in a destination management company in Japan, so it must be quite a big business for you to bring tourists into Japan.
It is, and it's a part of the goal. It's part of the national goal as well as part of our goal too, to contribute to that development. So obviously the 2020 Olympics is a driving force, but the Prime Minister of Japan and the whole government has taken an approach of a rapid development of inbound tourism, and we're playing a part in that process. We're also doing the regionalisation, so it's not focused exclusively on Tokyo as it had been in the past, so it's all over the place. So today it's around about the 50-50 mark, but the expectation is that the growth is going to come largely from inbound. And that will be particularly so as more and more Chinese become involved and get into Japan. Lots of Chinese business. It's going to Southeast Europe today, but it's going to come to Japan as well.
Yeah. So far your focus has actually been more on Korea, Hong Kong, Taipei, and not so much on mainland China yet. Was that partially a problem with slots at the key airports?
That's it. It's as simple as that. We only got the slots into Beijing and into Shanghai 2 years ago. But they're terrible timings.
Right.
But we're using price to leverage it, so we operate late night, early morning flights where there are slots, and that's all we can do. But it's quite limited. But we'd like to go on to more places. But the bilateral negotiations still have to take place to do new things. But that's certainly going to be the growth for the future.
I want to talk about Okinawa for a second. So you have pioneered one route from there, which I find quite interesting, which at the beginning you announced to be the first of many, but then that hasn't really happened yet. But so you start flying from Okinawa to Bangkok, which is a route that has never been served before.
Right.
So are you trying to build this, essentially to build Okinawa as a tourist destination for Southeast Asians, and that was the first step? And how is that going?
That is correct. Where else would we go to from Okinawa? Really? Yes, we could go down to Singapore, but we go to Hong Kong as well. It's an opportunity, but it's a tourist resort first, so we want to bring tourists in.
Right.
Now, when we get which I expect, we will be either getting long-range aircraft or we'll be getting into the medium haul. We're going to expand, and that will bring us into Singapore, into Jakarta, into Kuala Lumpur, and more operations. But from mainland Japan, you can't reach Bangkok in an A320. But that will change. But you can do it from Okinawa.
But you're not using Okinawa as a transit hub, so I can't book a connection. So the only way you could expand there is through wide-bodied aircraft. Is that something that you're looking at doing in the short term?
Absolutely not. No.
Like Chin Air and so on did it, or
no, no madness to do it.
You leave that to AirAsia and Scoot and argue about
exactly. No, and again, it's back to the philosophy here in Europe as well. Ryanair doesn't go into any of these places.
Right.
It sticks with the one standard aircraft type.
Yeah.
And that's critical to the whole success in terms of keeping your costs low.
Yeah.
And that's the way to do it. But we now have the Boeing 737 MAX
8,
the 8, and obviously, but more critically, we A321 LR, which they launched here in Hamburg just last week.
Right.
That's appealing. We haven't done the full evaluation yet. We don't know the fuel impact. We don't know the total operating cost associated with it. But all the indications are that could well give us the capability of expanding the network quite considerably.
Yeah. So originally when Peach was set up, it was a joint venture between ANA and two parties, and then ANA bought out one of the two. So now it has a lot more control over Peach than it had before, and owns about 67%, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
So how does this fit in with ANA's strategy of owning Vanilla Air 100% as well?
Right.
Essentially now they have Vanilla in Tokyo, you in Osaka, and both of you fly a little bit from the other place as well.
Yeah.
So are you cooperating more now that ANA owns more of you, or has that had no impact on how you work together?
You may have seen the ANA announcement last week in the corporate mid-term planning. Now we're going to look at bringing the two operations together, which is an obvious development. Rationalise some of the operation because they're both owned by ANA, so that scope is there for doing it. But it will equally be in conjunction with the ANA development. ANA will be cutting back in its domestic operation and putting the low-cost airlines into those operations and cutting back in some of the short-haul regional operations and leave it to the low-cost airline to do it. Well, they're not going to abandon it. They have the full range of products to be offered, but they do the differentiation that ANA will be a full-service airline in the traditional fashion, we're competitive with everybody else, and they have these other two airlines which will give them the capability of penetrating, getting involved in the low-cost market.
I think you're a very true believer in the true low-cost carrier model and staying as simple as possible.
Absolutely.
And Vanilla was one of the founding members of the Value Alliance. And there's now a second UFly low-cost carrier alliance in Asia. Yeah. Do you think it was the right decision for Peach to stay out of that, or do you think the others get lots of benefits out of that you're missing out on?
They see benefits and everything else. I don't. I mean, we talked to them all, and we had a look at doing other joint ventures and everything else. But if you stick to the principles of what we're trying to do, then you do not get into that kind of game. You don't have to. Now, for whatever reason, Vanilla made their decision. I won't question it. They made the decision. But we made equally this decision not to do anything like that.
If you look at the demographics of Japan, it's obviously a very aging population, so it doesn't look like the domestic travel market will necessarily grow significantly over a long period of time. So do you think there will eventually have to be consolidation because there is too many low-cost carriers trying to do the same thing and trying to grow at a speed which probably will not add up if you add all of the growth plans together? Or what's your view on that essentially?
I think you have to remember now, it's the low-cost operation, so we're generating and stimulating travel, which never happened before.
Right.
So, but it's millennials of the market. It's not the old age people that are there. So the mass numbers of people now going, whether it's to visit friends and relatives or go home or go on a trip or go on a stag night or a weekend event, this is the market that we're in. It's all 21 to 34, mostly females, is the market we have today. And that is potential to grow as well. But they're not ready to take the train, everything else, because it's just cheap to take the airplane. And that's why we're getting that market, and it is growing, and I'm pretty sure it will continue.
If you look at your fleet growth, it has essentially grown pretty fast in the first couple of years. In the last 2-3 years, it has slowed down a little bit. So you've taken, I think, 2 aircraft last year, one aircraft the year before.
Yeah, but we've 10 on order.
And then the Neo's coming as well.
And that's been the factor. We would not take the risk of going ahead and ordering the Neo until it was proven. And there was a lot of problems with the Neo in the early days, and obviously that's still an issue. But the next lot will be different. I'm sure there will be.
So are you planning to increase deliveries again over the coming years now that the Neos will come out?
Yes. And our mid-term plan has another 10 aircraft coming in the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. And do you already have you made plans already on what the mission profile will be for the A320 Neo once it comes, or are you just going to use it on the same routes?
Yes, same routes and replacement for the existing aircraft. I mean, we're 5 years in business now, so we want to be the leased aircraft. So
you want to go to 7-8 years and then start cycling them out?
Of course, yes. Again, the same principles for the low-cost airline. That's what you do.
Thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure, Don. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, good.